So we'll get into a session called Rivers Connect the World. Your host will be Gary Granata. Gary worked tirelessly to help build the first slow fish gathering in 2016, and he is the creator of Vanishing Foodways. And please join us later today. We will dive deep around the Blue Commons counter movement that is popping up in different communities around the world. Jess Hathaway, editor-in-chief of National Fishermen, will facilitate. We will meet in the Blue Commons session at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, and I did see Melanie Brown here, so I want to introduce another beautiful human. Melanie Brown she is Slow Fish. She's an organizer, fisherman, mom, chef, musician, the list goes on and on. So Melanie will lead us in this morning's blessing. Are you here, Melanie?
Yes. Hello. I just came on.
Good morning.
Yeah. Good morning, Guyana Chuknut, Kelly, and Guyana Dailuchi, everybody else for being here. My Yupik name is Taikuba. It means somebody who's come from far away. But I love that we can all come close together, even in virtual space, when we can't gather. I am reaching out to you from Slingatani, the place known as Santa Kahini. That's the original name. It means the place that has everything, but now on as Juneau, Alaska. My people are from Western Alaska. My parents are from the Bristol Bay region and the Norton Sound area. And we're all fishermen. My father became a Bristol Bay fisherman when he met my mom. And I'm looking forward to going to Bristol Bay this summer, provided there aren't any impediments. But yesterday I was out walking and I saw a bunch of migratory birds grouping up, and I was thinking, gosh, it looks almost like they're having a party, and it made me think of the gatherings where we migrate to be with each other. And all of us are fish people, so we migrate to our fishing grounds too. But I look forward to the day that we can all migrate to see each other at the next slow fish gathering, and just really enjoy the heck out of each other's company, like the birds I was watching yesterday. And I hope you have a great day and a great session. I'm looking forward to hearing about other rivers of the world, and I'm so thankful for this community. And I would ask that all of you acknowledge the land that you are on and who first peopled it. And I think if all of us can put our minds around that, I think we could all come to find good thinking around how we can make our world better on the other end of this pandemic and build back better. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful session. And Guyana.
Thank you, Melanie. Okay, so Gary, let's get started with Rivers Connect the World.
Okay, well, we'll see how we connect. Thank you, everybody. Good morning from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I drain into the Mobile River Basin. That's actually one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, believe it or not. During the pandemic, then Virtual Teta Madre, we have been tracing several of the rivers that I've both traveled, gathered stories, and rivers that I will be traveling. So through the 3 sessions where we covered the Mississippi and the Mekong, the Danube, and then Salmon Rivers, focusing on the Columbia River Basin and rivers in Ireland, there's been about 12 plus voices, and several of them are on today. I'm going to do a brief synopsis of each one, and hopefully if our coordination happens, people will be pulled in to introduce themselves in their river basin. We're kind of doing this on the fly and rolling with it like we've been doing the past 2 weeks. So allow me to share my screen, and to all of my panelists, don't be surprised if all of a sudden you're on the screen next to me. So here we go. Let me get this going, and there we go. And full screen. So this is the initiative Rivers Connect the World, and this is an amazing map that shows all of the river basins of the world. And today we're going to have a pretty open conversation amongst panelists and anybody that wants to raise their hand and ask questions about strategies to protect biodiversity and culture. Now, as we travel these river basins, all these conversations have started with the geologic history of the river basins, going into the biodiversity, and then the cultures that surround it, and then the influence of industrialization and colonization, and where these river basins are now struggling. And we're not going to go too deeply into those horror stories like we did in the 3 sessions that are recorded, and they're in our expo booth. We really want to get into an active conversation with these amazing people from these different river basins about what they are doing to protect biodiversity and their cultures. So we started off with the great land creators, the Mississippi and the Mekong. The rivers of the world arose about 18,000 years ago at the end of the last glacial age. And these are 2 great land building rivers. And I realize the image is a little shadowy, but if you look at the very delta of the Mississippi and the very delta of the Mekong, you will see the boot of Louisiana, and then that triangular region that is the Mekong Delta. Both those land masses are approximately the same size, and they were both created over the past 6,000 years of these great rivers draining their mountain ranges and bringing new land and fresh water down to build this land. So we're talking, in Louisiana, it's about, I think both these regions are about 10,000 square miles that these rivers created of new land. And realize we've been in, not with just climate change, but for the past 10,000 years, we have been in a time of global ocean rise. So these rivers have created these large land masses that are 2 of the most fertile regions in the world. These are migratory flyways. These are breeding grounds for most of the marine life in their regions. And since industrialization, they've also been 2 of the most rapidly disappearing regions in the world. So we're going to delve into these river basins really quick. And when we get into industrialization, we're going to really start talking about hydroelectric dams. And here's a depiction of the damming of the Mississippi River Basin. And when you get down to the Delta, the insults of the oil and gas extractive industries. Every orange dot is an oil or gas well. Every purple line is a pipeline. And if you can see that outline, that was the coast of Louisiana in 1922. And this map is about 10 years dated. So significantly more land has been lost since this map was first published. So we're now going to get into our panelists, and I hope the people behind the curtains will get them on. We're going to go to Tammy Greer. And Tammy, please introduce yourself and the things that you do to protect biodiversity and culture in your region of the world. Are we going to be able to do this?
Hi, everyone. So panelists, I need you to click the request to share audio and video button up in the top right-hand corner of your screen so that I can bring you on as Gary's introducing you. I see that he's having a problem and Kaylee is connecting with him, but everyone else, as long as you click that button, I should be able to see you in the queue.
And can I still keep full screen, or do I need to diminish so they can be seen?
Nope, you can keep full screen. They'll pop up at the bottom for everyone.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll keep talking till I see Tammy pop up. This is Tammy's medicine wheel in southern Mississippi. While she's technically not in the Mississippi River Basin, this is still that region.
Am I up?
I hear you.
Hang on. Okay, let me see.
We can see you, Tim.
Okay, something
Okay, I
is something
can't.
weird with
Okay.
the audio.
Yeah, there's a lot of reverb going on.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback.
Hang on. I think what happened is, okay, how about now?
Well, kind of like being at a concert.
Yeah. Yeah, but I want it off.
Do you have separate speakers on, Tammy? Because that could be creating a feedback
How about
loop.
now?
That's better.
Good?
Okay.
Okay. So I am a member of an Indigenous Gardens group. And long before I was a member of the Indigenous Gardens group, we created this medicine wheel right here that you see at the University of Southern Mississippi, because I'm a member of the United Homa Nation. And in our territory right here in Mississippi, we have the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. That's the name of the tribe that's here now. Formerly, it was the territory of Muskogee people, mostly Muskogee people, some others as well. But this garden was built the year of Hurricane Katrina, not because of Hurricane Katrina, but because the elders were asking us to build a space or to create a way for them to transmit knowledge about these plants. And these plants were used as food and medicine and dye and building materials and housing materials and weapons and just everything you can imagine for the people of this area. And so the elders are saying that they're losing the names of the plants in their own languages. They're not remembering the uses of the plants, and they would like a way to see these plants and transmit them to the youth so that we can all benefit from these plants and live in relationship with these plants and understand how vital they are for the survival of our material cultures, but also, you know, for our survival. We don't know what these plants have to offer. I know that river cane has to offer keeping the Mississippi at bay from our homes and and we've forgotten that river canes serve to keep the Mississippi River at bay and serve to filter the water and make the water cleaner. And by the time it got to our homes, there was not that that tidal surge that you get when the water comes in and goes out. So anyway, so we built this garden, and it's changed over the years, like all of us have changed. And now we are developing from that garden. I'm collecting the seeds from that garden and using those seeds to grow out little plants, which she creates like hundreds of thousands of seeds every year. So using those seeds to grow out little plants so that we can share with our tribal relatives and other people. And also, you know, little plants that are used as like in restaurants. We have a restaurant over here where a woman wants me to grow out dill for her so that she can serve dill in her restaurant. And so we're using seeds from this garden and other seeds to sustain ourselves, to have a place, to have fresh, whatever it is. So fresh juniper berries for seasoning meat, and fresh, I mean, the latest thing I did was made me some medicine from the elderberry plant. So elderberries are an antiviral, and I made me some antiviral medicine just in case COVID came in. And actually, elderberry is an antiviral specific to, or, you know, best for the kind of virus that COVID is, an enveloped virus. And also I made me some medicine from the what do you call it? Bone break. It's a plant that addressed bone break fever. So it's a fever plant. And I made some medicine from that too, and shared that with my friends and relatives. So we're using this garden for a lot of things, and it just happens to be also very beautiful.
That's amazing, Tammy. And I know we're going to talk more about this once we get into the unscripted part of
I
this.
can't hear you, Gary.
You can't hear me?
Wait, let me see.
We can hear you, Gary.
I can hear you.
Well, we will get more into your work as we get into the unscripted part of this and sharing our strategies. But next, we're going to go to Blaze. And Blaze, if you're sharing your screen, while Blaze was not part of the first Rivers conversation back in October, he has been very active in the work we've been doing in Louisiana. And he works with the Miro Foundation, Dockville Farm, where we held slowfish, and you can see New Orleans in the background. So Blaze, tell us about your work with the Miro Foundation, and the Headwaters to Delta initiative is really fascinating. You talk about and the work you're doing with replanting the coastal wetlands.
So can y'all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I work for the Miro Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization that has 4 pillars that are set up on education, the environment, children, and the elderly. And so my job is as the coastal environmental program manager, and that could mean I do just about anything from throwing a festival to managing a greenhouse, to building coastal restoration projects or environmental restoration. And over the years, I've worked with a lot of indigenous groups, and I'm really close friends with Tammy Greer. And from that, I've learned a lot from indigenous leaders, and I kind of Tammy and I like to talk seeds and plants. And one day she came to me with a whole lot of seeds from her garden and said, "Hey, do you want these for your new greenhouse?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "The only stipulation is that you need to give some of them out to indigenous people in the community around here." And so that's kind of been part of what I do. And then in my a lot of the work I do centers around coastal restoration, because we have an erosion issue and land loss issue in South Louisiana. And so I do anything from if you look in the top left corner or bottom left corner, that's kids from a local high school planting black mangroves in our region. If you look in the top left corner, that's Ag Magic, which is kind of like a large ag show for 4th graders in the greater New Orleans area. And then what you were talking about, our Waters to the Sea Mississippi River Delta Institute, is a program we put on with local teachers and then teachers up in Minnesota. And we do an institute down here where we talk about all our issues involved with the river, the coast, the environment, and how to teach science outdoors. And then we go and do the same thing up in Minneapolis or Stillwater, Minnesota. And then we take the teachers up to the headwaters, which a lot of teachers or a lot of people from here have never experienced that and don't often see clear running water, and it's kind of fascinating to them. So yeah, my work's kind of all over the map. Lately, last couple of years, I've been focusing on pawpaw trees and trying to develop cultivars for this region because there aren't any that are specifically from here. So I kind of tromp around the woods in the middle of the summer and get really hot and look for pawpaw fruit and to start from seeds. And I just got done this last week with planting an orchard full of a lot of my collections.
Cool. Well, like I told you, I've got some pawpaws ready for you when I get down in a couple of weeks. And
Awesome.
right now, it's really interesting. It's so easier for me to identify them because they're blooming. Yeah. The little ones are so similar to our native persimmons that I get them confused. But anyway, let me continue doing a synopsis of the previous ones as more and more of our panelists start to log on. So this was the Mississippi Mekong conversation, and living in southern Louisiana for 20 years, where we have a considerably large Vietnam population that arrived in 1975 after the fall of Saigon, started realizing with the work we were doing in Louisiana, there were so many parallels in the Mekong Delta. So what you're looking at here is Ile-de-Zon, St. Charles. This used to be a settlement that that island you see in the middle of your screen, I believe was about 10 miles long and 5 miles wide. It's now not even a half mile long and a quarter mile wide due to all of, you can see these navigation canals, the levees being built, saltwater intrusion. Also, this region would have been 300-foot cypress trees and cane, as Tammy was talking about, that actually grew to 100 to 150 feet tall. That still blows my mind, and I wish Bruce Barnes were on the call right now. He may log on later to get more into that. And this is actually where many of the bison from the Central Plains would come and winter over. Because, I mean, when you need something to eat, southern Louisiana is always a good place to go. So this is what the coast of Louisiana looks like today. And when I went to Vietnam, that's what the coast of Vietnam looks like today. This is Cao Mau in the Delta. And whereas this was all oil and gas wells and navigation canals, what you're seeing there is aquaculture ponds. Completely clear cut their coastal mangrove to grow shellfish and fish, a lot of which gets shipped into Louisiana and undercuts our local fisheries. And after about 10 years, this area is desolate and wasteland and eroding and subsiding. So there was the crossover. And unfortunately, because it's so late, it doesn't look like Dr. Chuang is going to join us, but I've been on this tour a couple of times with him. And here we have a similar thing of hydroelectric dams. The Mekong rises out of the Himalayas and empties into initially China, who has built gigantic hydroelectric dams and continues to build larger dams. It flows through Myanmar, which has been in the news lately. All these countries in which it flows through before it gets to Vietnam and the Delta. And by then, there is so much less water there. And then you get into the Delta, the overproduction of rice depletes it even more. And because so much is being diverted for rice, the communities in the Delta actually go to the deep water aquifer for their drinking water. And while they do have coastal erosion, not quite to the degree of Louisiana does, they have subsidence rates of 10 to 20 centimeters a year. So because they are just draining their basin. And if anybody's ever lived in a swamp, you know, there's all this talk about draining a swamp. Well, if you drain a swamp, the land disappears. And so that's what is happening in Vietnam. So now the next one we went to, we visited the Danube. And I believe we have Eugenio Berra online, if he can get in the queue to start talking about the amazing Danube. And similarly, here we see all the hydroelectric dams that have decimated the Danube, largely up in the rich headlands, you know, of Germany and Austria, so many dams. And then when you get into the more rural areas, there's less dams, but they have the problems of all the dams. And then when the beginning, at the entrance to the lower Danube, these iron gates were built in this gorgeous gorge to make it for transportation. And this was the end of the wild sturgeon. And now we'll get into some of the work that's being done. Eugenio, are you on today?
Yeah, yes. Hello everybody. I'm Eugenio. I'm Italian, but living in Belgrade along the Danube in Serbia. 10 years ago, let's say, I fell in love with this river. In my life, I deal with sustainable tourism, and so I started devoting this activity to the Danube. Somehow, yeah, we can say that my contribution to this panel is like this. I help protecting and preserving the biodiversity, the culture of this river through the sustainable tourism tours I've been organizing for almost 7 years. I also collaborate with the Slow Food Network from Southeast Europe and from the Danube region. So basically, I started traveling along the Danube. I started researching, meeting fishermen, meeting farmers, meeting small-scale producers, and I designed two packages, two tours. One here in Serbia and the second in the Danube Delta. I think that it works. It's important. It's important for us because we discover new places, new cultures. We also discover new producers, fishermen, products to put in contact with the Slow Food Network. It's important for the tourists because the tourists in this scenario can be seen as the slow food co-producers. So critical consumers allied with the producers, the farmers or the fishermen. But it's also obviously very, very important for these fishermen communities, farmers communities who live in these depopulated, marginalized areas of Europe. And I think that this intelligent, let's say, sustainable approach to tourism can help them a lot from an economical point of view, but especially because bringing it means transferring them self-esteem about their work, about what they are doing, and so keep them continuing with these activities.
Eugenio, Tiberio has not logged on. If you would, talk some about Ivan's work in the Mila 23 festival.
Okay, yes. Ivan Patsaikin is a former canoeing champion from this tiny village, Mila 23, in the Danube Delta. This is one of the place where I took my guests, my tourists. Why? Because it's an extraordinary, amazing village in the middle of the delta, but also because of this association, Mila 23, was established by Ivan Patsaikin, and they've been working for 15 years, I guess, in enhancing the old tradition of the Danube Delta. You can see these old canoe, these old boats. These were the boats of the old fishermen of the Delta. Now, unfortunately, are almost disappeared from the Delta. So they try to valorize these old traditions. Also through tourism, because they organize this fish tourism with these old boats, and they also collaborate with Slow Food because they researched and listed the Arc of Taste product from the Danube Delta.
Great, great. And those traditional boats look so much like the pirogue in southern Louisiana. I'm sure Blaze is checking that out. All right, so let's now move on to our next river basin. The final one was Salmon Rivers, and unfortunately for today, the people that were on that last one, no one has logged on. However, we do have Dune Lankard from the Copper River Basin. Just quickly, what we did in the previous one, and again, these are all recorded on YouTube, and they're also in our expo booth. We were looking at the Columbia River, particularly stories along the Snake and the Okanagan. So Dune.
Yay.
You on?
Yeah, good morning.
Good. Please share some of your stories of your work preserving the salmon rivers in the Pacific Northwest.
Sure. I don't know if you were able to receive the little map that I emailed to you. I don't know if there was a way to put that up, but I'll just go ahead and jump in. I'm Dune Lankard, EAC Athabascan from the Copper River Delta region in Alaska. It was wonderful to see Melanie Brown. I'm a total fan of her and all her work. My people have lived along the Copper River for the last 3,500 years. We've been commercial and subsistence fishermen in my lifetime. We've had three major catastrophes that have rocked our fishing world in my lifetime. It first started with the 1964 earthquake, the 9.4. It pretty much devastated our fisheries for a good long time. It changed the bottom of the ocean and really harmed our fisheries. And when things finally started making a comeback 25 years later, on the anniversary of the Good Friday earthquake, we had the Exxon Valdez oil spill happen in our backyard in pretty much the same spot. And in that, impacted every commercial and subsistence fishery along 1,500 miles of coastline from Valdez, where the spill happened, at Bly Reef, down past Kodiak, and some near the Aleutian chain. So in the last 25 years, we've been recovering from that. There's still a lot of dead zones. There's a lot of areas that just haven't fully recovered. You can go out into the sound and there's still no life. There's still lingering oil in some of the beaches. Our wild salmon fisheries has been taken over by hatchery fish and hatcheries, 5 of the largest in the world. And then we have, the area, still the herring, which was 200,000 ton of herring returning annually, is down around 4,000 ton returning. And so if the herring ever recover, because they're like little torpedoes of energy, the 27 most heavily impacted species would also recover. And then 25 years later from that date, we have climate change. And so normally, if that's such a word, 3 years ago, we would have 1 to 2 million sockeyes, red salmon, return home to the Copper River Delta each year. And as a gill netter, a fisherman, I've grown up, catching 70, 80, 90 pound kings, big sockeyes, big red salmon. 3 years ago, only 44,000 came back. 2 years ago, the ocean heated up to 76 degrees for 3 weeks, down to 20 feet below the surface, killing millions of krill, mussels, wild kelp, salmon, and birds. And then last year, only 85,000 sockeyes found their way home. And not only did they come back in less in number, but smaller in size. So an average sockeye is about 6 pounds. They were coming back at 4.5. So that means there's less food source for them out in the ocean. And so I decided to, sell my gillnet permit that is part of who I am, and I was one of the last 3 EAC fishermen on the Copper River Delta, and now there's only 2, my nephew and my older brother Joe. But I decided to get into kelp farming and do everything I can to, do my part to give back to the ocean, because the ocean is my friend, and we have this goddess. Her name is Willitney, and Willitney has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And you always talk to Willitney and thank her for the returning salmon and hope that they find their way home each year. But Willitney is struggling right now, and so I know that we have our work cut out for us. And I would be happy to get into the solutions work in the next part as I talk.
Oh yeah. And Dune, I'm so glad you and I finally connected. This is actually our first time being able to chat. And one thing I just want to reach out to you and everybody in Valdez, because y'all were our friends when the Gulf Horizon disaster struck Louisiana in 2012. Much like we're resources for other regions when they get struck by hurricanes, of helping them to know what to do. When that hit, so many people from Valdez reached out to us and said, here's what's going to happen. Watch out. And a lot of things changed because of that. One thing, as far as when the oil companies are fined for doing this, it goes into escrow. So from the Valdez disaster, correct me if I'm wrong, whatever remunerations you got were from a escrow account from the previous disaster. And people from Valdez allowed us to understand that, and that has been changed. So now that if an oil company oils your beaches, your waterway, your estuaries, they have to pay for that damage, not into a fund. So I really appreciate that collaboration as somebody who lived in Louisiana for 20 years for helping us in our time of need. I'm going to quickly finish up. We haven't had some of the other voices log on, but just to let people know what we were talking about. One of the big things, I was hoping Sam Mace was going to be able to log on, and what's happening on the Snake and in the Columbia River Basin is that a right-wing congressman has proposed a $33 billion project to remove the 4 major dams in the lower Snake to preserve salmon, to restore salmon habitat. And this also includes money for agriculture, to find other ways to irrigate and to transport rather than using the river. The energy sector, we're to go to renewable sources versus hydroelectric. And I refuse to call hydroelectric renewable because it destroys just as much habitat as extracting fossil fuels. So there's a lot of amazing stuff happening to restore habitat in that region. And unfortunately, Sally hasn't logged on to talk about what she's doing in West Cork, but Sally's been very active in this network. I actually met her twice at Slow Fish in Genoa, and hopefully she'll log on before this is over. So this is now what I really want to get into, is for the panel and anybody that's online, start talking about the strategies to protect biodiversity and culture. And I've been so fortunate to be able to have these conversations, but as I'm talking to people in different parts of the world, it's kind of like I've heard this before, and I kind of liken it to like same pew, different church, because the work that people are doing is to restore and protect habitat, getting to local artisanal production and processing. I work with a lot of farmers. This is also happening on land. Just like fishers are at the mercy of the commodity docks and whatever they're paying, farmers are the same way, and they're starting to do more on-farm production. We've had, during this 2 weeks, Lance Nacio from Louisiana log on. Lance processes all of his shrimp, so he's not at the mercy of the commodity market. And then tourism. We've had good talk about tourism. Eugenio's doing great stuff on the Danube to bring tourism. I can't wait to go and visit his tours. So this is where we're going to go from here. Let me figure out how to unshare screen so we can see one another. Okay, pardon me while I click on things. And we look at infinity for a while. And is that unsharing screen there? Stop share. And there we all are. Great. Okay. So to me, this is the fun part of the conversation, in that we've been on these calls now for a year, and everybody tells their stories and shares their slides. And then at the 5 or 10 minutes, we start getting into that interaction between people on the call. So Dune, I'm gonna let you, since we haven't heard much from you in these talks, I'm gonna let you continue, but everybody else, as you hear Dune talk about something that's similar to your work or may influence your work, please chime in and let's start getting this dialogue across on what we all are doing to protect biodiversity and culture.
Sure. You know, I guess first I'd like to, just share the Exxon settlements on what we received. We were able to get 286 million in compensatory damages. And after 20 years of appeals and 17 different appeals, Exxon was able to reduce our verdict after, they got the Supremes of their dreams, and they reduced the 17-1 punitive damage settlement from 5 billion down to 500 million, which was equivalent to one good day of fishing. And we received a $900 million settlement where there's been about 400 and some odd million spent on science that shows that oil and water don't mix. And we were able to get about 400 million spent on habitat protection. Was probably the biggest act of restoration we could actually do. So we have saved 1 million acres of salmon habitat that would have been clear cut in the spill zone. Had the spill not happened, we wouldn't have been able to save the forest, which is very ironic. And then Exxon, they probably would have had better luck cleaning up the Exxon Valdez oil spill if they'd taken that $2 billion and took a couple of jets over Prince William Sound and the spill zone and dumped all those, all that money in $20 bills across the entire spill zone. They probably would have had a better cleanup than that, because everyone certainly would have gone out there and collected that money and was able to clean up more of the oil spill than they ever got to. As far as what we're doing now and what we're living through on the Copper River Delta, there's still dreams of building deep water ports in the name of oil spill response. They want to build a 55-mile road across the Copper River Delta to access these Bering River coal fields that we've been working on, that I'll get into in a moment, that we've been saving, keeping from being developed over the last 27 years. The BLM wants to strip mine the glaciers where they're starting to recede, because in Alaska, because we're colder than most, the permafrost, the glaciers, and the sea ice is melting at unprecedented rates. So the Bering Glacier, they want to mine around 90,000 acres around there. And then the Alaska Mental Health Trust is doing a mental act. They want to strip mine 30 to 45 miles of active living beach line near the Cape Yagatega Icy Bay region to take the minerals out of the sand and the silt. That could disrupt our fisheries again. And last year, we recently stopped this oil drilling offshore at Katella. They wanted to drill for oil and gas in 90,000 acres. And we were able to successfully stop that. And the military starts bombing the Gulf again, the Gulf of Alaska, on May 3rd to the 14th, right before a Copper River fishery starts. In the last 3 years, as I mentioned, the fish have been disappearing. There's been over 50 whales wash up on the beaches without bullet holes in them. So it hasn't been fishermen or subsistence people who've been killing them. And we're doing everything we can to stop the military from bombing the Gulf. And so we just decided that, it's time that we become even more proactive. Saving habitat wasn't enough. And we realized that we had to figure out how we're going to preserve our subsistence way of life and at the same time start growing traditional food sources that we have historically survived on for the last 3,500 years. And so when the EX came out of the interior of Alaska down to the Gulf, as the glaciers were slowly receding, a thin green strip of habitat was being formed, and that's where we survived. And we'd live off the salmon and all the foods. We have a native saying, and Melanie knows this quite well, is that when the tide is out, the table is set. And that's how we survived, was off of all those critters and clams and kelp and everything. We have 2,000 years of history harvesting herring roe on kelp and kelp. And I remember even in my family growing up, on a super low minus tide, we would go out and gather kelp. And my first income was actually grappling for herring roe on kelp. And when our fishery started collapsing, I called my friend Brent Smith from Greenwave, who were both Ashoka Fellows and Future of Fish Fellows. And I told him what was happening, and he told me about his kelp farms and how kelp could sequester carbon 20 times more than living tree forests, how bivalves could filter 40 to 60 gallons of water each daily. And I realized that, this was what I could do to help the ocean. So I flew back east and met with him and saw his operation. And Greenwave had started 50 kelp farms in the last 3 years. So I realized that I needed to partner up with someone who really knew the industry and could help us get kelp in the water. And so we moved quickly. We realized there was numerous bottlenecks to entry and barriers to entry that we had to overcome. Everything from the permitting process to landscape analysis to figuring out, kelp farmer loans to looking at how are we going to, get seed? How are we going to source our seed? We're going to find it, gather it, grow it, cultivate it. So we had to build a seed nursery. We got 7 test lines in the water last fall. We've got permitting for 7 22-acre farms that'll be going in the water this fall. We, had to find courageous people to step up and do this. So 4 out of the 7 of us are indigenous peoples. And now we have 21 tribes across Alaska that are interested. They're realizing that, and they want to get in for 3 reasons. And the first one is that they want to help the ocean. So it's for restorative purposes. The second is that they want to grow a traditional food source to feed their people. And third, but certainly not last, is they want to create a regenerative economy, because what the kelp and the mariculture industry actually has the potential to do is to create a new fledgling industry that's based on conservation and restoration, not extraction. And at the same time, we'll be able to create a numerous byproducts, because kelp is like the hemp of the sea. It is this beautiful product that you can turn into oils, biofuels, supplements, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, 150 different food products, compost, fertilizer, mulch. I mean, the list goes on. And so we just felt that, if we were able to figure out, what the tribe's needs were, how to help them set up a structured fund, a way to get long-term low interest loans at deferred payment. So once you're actually making money, then you figure out how to pay your loans back. And so we're going to do a listing tour across Alaska with all the different tribes to not only hear what their concerns are, because the first concern is that kelp and mariculture farming on the ocean is a modern day land claims that's happening on the ocean. So much like the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1971, where they took our native land, now our oceans are going to be taken by corporations, by canneries, by processors, by hatcheries, because for some reason, even though they're not allowed to own gillnet permits, SANE permits, longline permits, CDQs, ESQs, IFQs, they're able to own kelp and mariculture farms. How can this even be? Because the only jobs that we're going to get is we're going to be harvesting their kelp and their mariculture or processing it for them while they continue to be these billion-dollar companies. So people need to organize. So we're going to write a Indigenous Farmers Bill of Rights. We're going to do a declaration of principles. So we're going to demand our presence in this kelp space. And it's going to be something that is going to happen not only in Alaska, but around America and around the world. And so, now we've got all these opportunities. One of the things that we did, and I'll just take another moment. One of the things that we were able to do was convince the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council to set $25 million aside for development of mariculture. So it'll be one of the first acts of restoration that they've actually done in their 30 years of existence on their way out the door. The other thing is that we've got a couple of proposals into them. And at the same time, we're looking at how do we save more habitat? We've been talking to the same Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council. They're interested in helping us preserve the Berrien River coal field on the eastern delta that's been in play for about 113 years. And if we're able to purchase this coal field, we'll essentially save all 3 million acres of the lower Copper River watershed for all time. And now the government is saying that the Land and Water Conservation Fund is fully funded for the first time since before Clinton. And there's also monies available now through the 30/30 Fund. And it was one of the first 10 executive orders that Biden signed into office in his first 2 weeks. And the importance of that 30/30 Fund is that the only way that they're going to be successful, and their goal is by the year 2030 to save 30% of federal lands and 30% of the oceans. The only way that that's going to happen is working with indigenous peoples. And then we're going to be able to save more land, more ocean, more habitat as we're moving forward during these changing times. And so I've been telling all my friends, I don't know what's going to happen after 4 years, but we got 4 years to figure it out and come up with a real plan. And I'm in. Are you?
Dune. Yeah, Dune. That was amazing. And one thing in this past year of being on so many of these with the tribes from the Pacific Northwest, and then my experiences in living in the Mississippi and getting to know Eugenio and the Danube and Chung and the Mekong, is this passion that's coming out of the Northwest. But this is just from my perspective, is that, the Danube was the northernmost border of the Roman Empire. So it was conquered 2,000 years ago. The lower states, the land that, stolen land built by stolen people. The tribes were marched off in the 1800s. You still have your elders. You still have people that know what these rivers were like before the dams went up, before all this insults, because it's taken that long for colonialism and industrialization to get there. So I want to start opening this up because I feel so much coming out of the Northwest that starts saying it's a pebble that's being dropped in the ocean that's rippling across, the world. I think we have so much to learn because we have people like Tammy, that still knows the history of the region and is learning more. So I want to open up. Tammy, please chime in on what Dune is saying in your work. And if my perspective makes any sense whatsoever.
We, down here, the tribes are separated in proximity geographically, and sort of we've been insulated or insular from one another because we've had to compete over resources. And so right now, though, we're coming together. And I think the very thing that's bringing us together, I've been asked by several tribes to build these wheels or to share plants, or, I mean, it's really funny that the the plant relatives are bringing us together. At least that's how it seems to me. And so we have like from New Orleans we're headed up to North Mississippi, where we're building greenhouses and building gardens. And some people want these medicine wheel gardens because there's a spiritual component to it as well. And so yeah, we're finally down here realizing that we're not going to individually get much of anything going, that we really do need to connect to one another. Like Doom was saying, we have to get together and make it a common goal. And for some reason, these plants, people, because they sustained us for thousands of years, and we owe it to them to reach back out to these plant relatives and support them, and because they're going to be gone as well. This Yopon holly that's grown on the coast, when the coast floods, that Yopon holly, the foundation of our black drink, our ceremonial black drink, like one of the most important ingredients of our ceremonies, will be gone. And so we need to be planting, and we need to be moving these plants with us upstream until we see that we're safe and they're safe as well. So it seems to me like we've not come together, and we're coming together now. So we're just starting. We're taking baby steps, Gary.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Yopon. I'm in my last phase of clearing. It's going in largely because of what I've learned from you, but also the caffeine that gets me going in the morning. I want it coming off my land, not from another region that's been exploited by a commodity coffee or tea. I want what's coming from my land. Blaze, that's like right in your wheelhouse, because just so you know, Blaze was an up and coming top chef in New Orleans, not to use the TV show, and he walked away from that to start doing this work with coastal restoration. So Blaze, you're doing a lot of amazing stuff with native plants. Talk about that and tie it in with the conversation.
I do a lot of foraging, and one of the books that was really transformative for me was Native Plants of the Gulf South. And you can't read that book and not realize that just about every plant that's in there that's used, or that there's a known use in modern society in this book, everyone goes back to this tribe from South Alabama. They used it this way. And then, you'll get like the Homa down here used it in this fashion. And, the Ojibwa or you name the tribe, they're in there listed as they've used it. And I kind of, that's the epicenter of it. So when I get to interact with indigenous people like Tammy, who knows ridiculous amounts of knowledge, I try to absorb as much as possible. But at this point, where I work, I have a little bit of a budget and a greenhouse and a lot of land to work with. And so I'm in kind of a phase of, let me collect these different things. So we have, Red Bay was traditionally used by indigenous cultures, and then is also used in food here. And so I've started to go around and take cuttings off of trees that I know this person has it in their yard and this person does there. And I'm trying to kind of collect as much as I can genetically and put it in one spot. And then at the same time, I can't keep everything that I collect. I can grow it in a pot, but I can give it away to people that have like-minded ideas. And that's really the basis of the work that I do in that regard. I also do restoration through native plants as well, but that's a little bit of a different story.
Blaze, could you put that book in the chat? People are asking about.
Absolutely.
Eugenio, you're doing a lot of stuff with tourism, but it's built around, many of the native plants, traditional food systems along the Danube. Talk more about that and how that ties in with this conversation, because we are a community, the slow food community, the Tetamaja community, we like to travel. And we're not traveling to go to the Disneys of the world. We want to go where traditional foods are, where the native foods are. And you do that with your tour very well, Eugenia. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes,
You're on mute. There we go. There we go.
the gastronomy of this region of the Danube is a sort of a beautiful metaphor of Europe, because is a meeting between the Slavic, of course, gastronomy, the Ottomans, the Hungarian, the German, and the Jewish, the Sephardic culture. The Sephardic Jews coming from Spain, expelled from Spain at the end of the 15th century. I made researches with the colleagues from Slow Food International, and there are several let's say slow food spots along the Danube, from wine making to spirits, fish, obviously on the Danube Delta. But what I wanted to tell, maybe it's interesting also for this conversation, is the potential negative effects of the tourism, because I presented what I hope is a positive approach to tourism. But for instance, on the Danube Delta is also an interesting case study about the negative effect of the mass tourism, because what happened in the 90s, this delta was declared under the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The fishing was forbidden, and so this fisherman community basically turned into tourist activities. The coast of the delta was completely exploited by huge hotels. The local gastronomy lost a lot, because you know that the mass tourists want always the same things, even if they are traveling to US or to Asia. From an anthropological point of view, was also very delicate, because there was a shift in the domestic roles. So the men lost their jobs, they couldn't fishing anymore, and so the women became the male breadwinner of the families, because they were and they are the ones in charge of the tourism sector. So again, talking about tourism is quite that, and can badly affect the local communities.
Yeah, it's always a balance, and Collis is talking about shared values. You know, just increasing tourism is not necessarily a good thing, but it does create a revenue stream that assists people in continuing to be artisans. I know farmers, when I travel to Italy, I stay at agriturismi, and that additional income through tourism, people staying on their farm, is just enough to keep them on the farm, so nobody has to get an off-farm job. We're starting to have some questions pile up in the queue about dams and dams coming down. And before we get to the Pacific Northwest, Eugenio, is there any conversation on the dams, particularly at the Iron Gates, because to help restore the sturgeon? Because for those of you that don't know, ever since the Iron Gates were erected, the beluga sturgeon, the world famous beluga caviar, is no longer wild in the Danube, and that was the source, the world source for the best caviar in the world. Is there any talk about trying to remedy that in any way?
Not here, not at the Aaron's Gate. There are several projects on the Danube Delta. but sturgeon here in
Yeah.
Serbia is ciao, is lost for good,
Yeah.
unfortunately. The
Yeah.
problem of the dams is a regional problem.
Yeah.
Not only the Danube is affected, but almost all of the rivers of the Balkans. And there is a coalition, a network working and advocating against this huge problem, which is probably nowadays the biggest problem of this region.
Yeah, you know, we talk about, again, you're in the Delta. We talk about that in Louisiana, in the Delta, of what's going on upriver is what's destroying our waters. And one thing, just as a little side note, where I am, I'm just on the edge of the Black Belt, the historic Black Belt, the historic cotton growing region, and so many of the dams in this area were built for a mill. Well, the mills closed 50, 60 years ago. But the dams have stayed there. And finally, some of these small towns are starting to take down the dams. And there was a little pushback, but it's like, well, the dam's useless, the mill's gone, so why not take down the dam? And the river's back. And then all of a sudden, these small rural communities have become whitewater rafting. People are moving there because they want to be able to kayak. So it's interesting, you know, to start talking about this, that there are these new economies coming from taking down dams. And actually, Kelly actually was talking about that in the chat and how we might preserve this, you know, as part of the Blue Commons, which is the next. So again, you know, Dune, you were talking about what y'all are doing there, kind of being that ripple to unite Indigenous people around the world around these concerns. Just off the cuff, to start talking about other places like the Mekong, the Danube, where these giant dams have been erected and historic species have gone extinct. Any thoughts about, you were talking about getting that to where we unite around the world to start addressing these issues?
You know, I think that in this time of you know, chaotic change, including this pandemic, the reality is that the world is changing quickly, and we need to change our relationship with our food sources. And I feel like, you know, that should be one of the driving forces that people get behind, to tear these dams down, to let the fish come back. You know, they found that if you develop just 10% of wild salmon habitat, whether they're roads or dams or you know, development, that the salmon could disappear and they could be gone for 100 years. But if you restore that salmon spawning habitat, those salmon will be back in 3 to 5 years. And it's just a matter of us having the courage to do that. And, you know, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Elizabeth Hoover, she wrote this article, and it was basically, how can you call yourself sovereign if you can't feed yourself? And I was like, oh my God, you know, I mean, we have to figure out how we're going to feed our people. And one of our board members on the Native Conservancy is Winona LeDuc. And she came to Alaska 3 winters ago and gave this wonderful talk about her food systems approach. And that's when I realized that, you know, I had to pump up, you know, our work to figure out how we're going to not only start growing our own traditional food sources, but how we were going to process it and remotely, and not have to use canneries or processors or big factories. And we designed this community cold storage project, and this portable and affordable processing, freezing, smoking, community kitchen in 40-foot vans. And so I designed this model, and for 15 years, the city of Cordova, where I live, has shot the project down. And this year, they finally decided to put together a survey on who would use this facility if one was ever built. Well, everyone would use it. When you have less fish and less resources, and people actually care about quality over quantity, then they're going to take care of their food source differently. And so I think it's really important as indigenous peoples, we have thousands and thousands of years of history of preserving our food sources. Like the EACs, we would smoke it, we would pickle it, we would jar it, we would, do the fermenting. I never liked that. They did the drying, they did a number of things that would preserve our food. In different areas in Alaska, they had permafrost, so they could dig down and have a cellar and go further and have a freezer. Well, the permafrost, because it's melting, they're not going to have that luxury anymore. So I found a new freezing technology called a cell alive system in Japan. And basically what it is it's this freezing technology that excites the molecules inside of the product as you're freezing it. So it freezes from the inside out rather than the outside in. So therefore there's no crystallization, there's less moisture loss, less dehydration, less freezer burn, therefore a longer shelf life. Technology like that and applying it to not only what we're doing in the seafood industry, but it would also apply to vegetables and animals. It also apply to kelp. So we just have to be creative, and we have the collective intelligence and the technology, but do we have the courage to really take the time in this moment to change the world? And I think that the ones who do not are going to perish. The ones who step up and their voices are heard, and we find new leaders around the world that actually care, those are the ones that are going to matter and that we're going to want to back. And so I feel as long as we're in circles like this, sharing our ideas and our thoughts, we're going to be able to start grooming those new leaders for these new times. Absolutely.
That's great, June. I want to loop in Blaze and Tammy on this, because as we know, what's happening in Louisiana is an engineered disaster. Katrina did not hit New Orleans, but it was the failure of a disaster that had been engineered decades before. And now the same people that engineered the ongoing disaster are the same ones that are trying to engineer it coming back, such as many of the propose diversions to allow the river to go back to naturally building land. I want to get some thoughts, Tammy and Blaze, about what is being proposed, and again, the failure to acknowledge the indigenous knowledge. They're engineering large diversions rather than smaller diversions to let the river be what the river actually is.
Well, first thing I would like to ask Dune, have you started to work? Do y'all have Sea Grant up there?
Yeah, we do. We are working with them on some of our kelp work. Yes.
Okay. They've been very helpful down here as far as trying to set up systems for a lot of our fishermen sell straight to the dock and they get a very low price for that. And they've tried to help them set up more of like a digital interface for their product. And we've found that's one of the best ways to build wealth within the community, rather than, if you can sell your shrimp or for a dollar versus 13 cents at the dock, then it's a whole lot, it's worth a lot more. I'm throwing just numbers out of nowhere, but they've found that they've been able to make better money that way. But as far as the diversions and everything that's going on here, this coast has kind of been a catastrophe since colonization. Like Gary was pointing out, all the canals that have been dug. We've walled off the river. It does not function the same way. The dams hold sediment up in the Midwest, and so it's a dying system that's been shunted off and kept from renewing itself, which it would naturally do. As far as like the planned diversions, these are multi-billion-dollar projects that are designed to mimic the river. And Gary, I understand what you're saying, like with smaller diversions, and I think those are happening more upriver. When we're dealing with the lower part of the river, the river swings back and forth, kind of like a high pressured hose, and it's wanted to, since I believe around the 60s or the 70s, it's wanted to switch to the Chafalaya Delta, and those are in geological terms. My background, as well as being a chef, I'm also I'm a geologist, and in geological time, those are very quick happenings, and it can be pretty violent, and I think with our fisheries have gotten used to the idea of a stagnant river that only goes one way, and right, all the sediment and water goes straight out, as well as the boats that go up and down the river, they go straight out that way instead of a river that would change back and forth. And so when the oystermen went and took our natural reefs, destroyed the structure of those, and laid out the shells across the bottom, that was actually an interaction with Croatian fishermen that moved here. They showed them how they did it. I think that's the Adriatic Sea. Is that right, Eugenio?
That would, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
They showed them how to lay it out across the bay and get more oysters and more of a uniform oyster, and that really has been catastrophic. But they're used to using these certain bays every year for their product, whereas when it was a wild system, you could not do that kind of thing, or could do it for a couple of years and then you would have to move. And so we've totally screwed up our system. And this is, I view the large scale diversions as a very good thing for our system, because it puts inputs of fresh water, inputs of sediment that we need.
Okay.
And anytime you're at any point where the river actually interacts with the bay, you see life just brimming over. And I think it's really more of an economic issue with these fishermen. And to be honest, our oyster fishermen are the wealthiest people in our communities. They have made a living from suing oil companies for good reason, but and then they made a lot of money off of the oil spill. But they literally have gold chains and alligator boots and huge houses, the majority of them. So I feel sorry for people that'll be impacted, but for our ecosystem and the greater good of our communities, I think it's important that these large scale diversions go through.
Okay. Yeah, this is an ongoing conversation, and
It's a flashpoint in our community.
Oh yeah, and I again, when I was living down there, I'd go to these meetings just to be a fly on the wall. I like being in sponge mode and listening to people, because everybody's got their perspective. Just to kind of your geology background, to shift kind of over to Eugenio, my understanding is when the Danube meets the Black Sea, one of the branches is channelized for the big shipping, but the other branches, some of them are still free flowing. Is that correct, Eugenio?
Yes. There is one artificial channel, the Sulina one, was made at the end of 19th century for transportation, and was established. It's interesting. This European Danube Commission was like a sort of European Union 100 years before. And the other two channels are not artificial, yes. But
Okay, I just saw two more. Yeah, Tiberio is on. We're trying to get him in the queue. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and hopefully Tiberio and Sally can join us. We're doing this virtually, and hopefully we will start gathering in person. And Eugenio is hopefully going to be hosting a slowfish in Belgrade in 2022. So, and his tours are very affordable. So Blaze, that may be something I'm definitely going to start doing these sharing, doing these activities in person, going to their events, going to their festivals. I know the salmon feast on the Okanagan in September is one I definitely want to try to attend. Seeing if Tiberio and Sally are able to get on, asking somebody to queue them up. Okay, Sally has a carpenter in her house, can't get on the mic, so she's in the chat. Tammy, haven't heard from you in a while. Again, we're talking about engineering, re-engineering native lands. I always that's the question I always have when I hear these projects. I always go, yeah, but what was it? I'm always wanting to know. I'm always Toto pulling behind the curtain. What is it we're not talking
I
about?
think we're still in the, human beings, we have not been here that long. We are kind of the last to come on the scene. The animals have been here a lot longer than we have. The plants have been here a lot longer than we have. The rivers, the sun has been here. The earth, they all are like older brothers and sisters. They've been here a really long time and a lot longer than we have. And so I think some of this, for us, the reason we're getting ourselves into trouble is that we're young. And as human beings, we do not, it's like, we're taught to watch our elders, listen to our elders. They've been here a lot longer than we have. Well, these plants and these animals and these rivers and these systems, these ecosystems, they're as well our elders. And if we don't listen to them, we start wanting what we want when we want it. And we get into this paradigm, which we are in right now, full blown in the middle of a paradigm of domination. It's like we're going to have what we want, and we're going to pull out the big machines and the bombs and anything that we can throw at it and do what we want to this earth. So that river, she wants to move, and we do not want that for her to move. And we're about to find out, maybe, I don't know, maybe probably not too long, that she's going to do what she wants to do. She's an entity in and of herself, and you have to be considerate of what she wants to do too. And so here we are, we're going to bomb and build and cut and do the same things that we did to get ourselves into this situation, trying to get ourselves out of this situation. And I think we're right now, it's calling for not bigger machines, but a paradigm change, where we're thinking of these entities like our plants and the animals and the rivers as like a co-creator. Like, how can we work with you so that you do what you need to do to sustain yourself, and we do what we need to do to sustain ourselves as well? And maybe we can work together like the tribes are working together. Maybe we can work together with the natural environment so that we're not fighting against it all the time, and she's getting what she needs to maintain herself, and we're getting what we need so that we can survive. I do believe she'll last a lot longer than we will.
She's been here longer, and as you were talking about, we haven't been here long. When I went out to the Navajo to visit my friends at the Danube for their Sheep is Life festival, and you see 300 million years in the rock settlement. I mean, in the rock strata, and you go, okay, that changes the conversation. You actually see 300 million years before your eyes. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around that. And now a new brain to wrap ourselves around is Miss Sally Barnes. How you doing today, Sally?
I'm very good, thank you. There's a bit of background noise here. Can I just say something? I'm just totally enchanted with where these conversations are coming from, because the respect for the natural world that I'm hearing and the fact that we've got to just stop being so bloody greedy and acknowledge that we are part of a whole enclosed system. If you want to see the planet Earth as like an orange, you know, that's the way I see the planet. And so every single molecule on this planet is connected. And we've just tried to ignore that, and we're trying to control nature, and look where it gets us. You know, I just love the fact that, sorry, this is going to sound really weird. COVID has made me think, here we are. Oh, is that me? Oh no, that's a change. COVID has made me really appreciate the total beauty of what Mother Nature has. This is Eden. Oh, shut up now.
Okay. All right. Well, we're getting to the end, but our friend Tiberio has just logged on to join the conversation. Tiberio, we've come to the point where we are humbled to Mother Earth, and she's in charge.
Okay. Do you hear me? Hi.
So,
do you hear me? Well,
yeah,
we have left so few minutes, but what I have pointed into the chat is that I discovered an old issue which we are getting around all the time. It's the issue of the tragedy of the commons, and the things are much more complicated than we can imagine. So going back to a natural status of governing the commons is very hard. So I think that speaking about the situation in the Danube Delta, it should be thought that specific solutions must be solved to resolve the problems of sustainability, long-term preserving of the nature and heritage. So an issue like 100 years ago or decades old ago, it is any more possible, but just working with communities, local communities, to find local solutions.
mm-hmm. And that was a really good segue, because what's following us is the Blue Commons. And since this is our first gathering as this group, I want to let you know that your log on is good for today and tomorrow. You can check out what's going on in the Blue Commons to expand on this more. Also, I strongly encourage everybody to go to the Expo and check out the 2 films that you can stream for the next 48 hours, The Wild and Last Man Fishing. These are great documentaries to watch at your leisure. It's not just during these hours, because this will be going for the next 48 hours. We're getting to the wrap up of this. So let's just go around the horn really quick for some last comments.
Sure.
June, your last thoughts?
You know, we just can't go overboard too, you know, when we look at permanent protection and habitat. There's been a movement to get a big W wilderness in the Copper River Delta. And, you know, and the thing about a big W is you can ban commercial fishing and ban subsistence and ban the people from their livelihoods on our ancestral land. And the thing is that we can't allow this place to be loved to death either. Because, you know, if we do everything we can to preserve it and restore it and make it as wild as can be, there's been a move to take the Copper River and get wild scenic status on it. Well, every map printed for the rest of time will say wild and scenic, and everybody will want to come love it to death. So there has to be some moderation in everything that we do. The other thing that I'd just like to mention is that, you know, we started a cultural GIS mapping project that is bringing our traditional, historical, ancestral place names back to life. That'll help with recognition for preserving sacred places and getting a land claim. So everyone should be thinking about working with Indigenous peoples to do that as well. And I'm just honored to be here and a part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Dune. And that's a perfect segue to Tammy, because the place I love so much, New Orleans, I now refer to as Bulbancha, because that is the
And we're
name.
losing our space. I mean, our tribes are literally being moved out of where they live because of what oil companies have done, dredging and cannibalizing the earth. And we are literally being moved. I mean, I agree that there's no going back to what it was 200, 300 years ago, but that does not mean, it's like in a family. There's no going back to when your children were little and you told them what to do and you had, but we can work with nature no matter where we are and what we're doing. We can give nature a voice and work with nature so that we get what we need, but also we're not nearly as destructive about it as we are now.
Right. Eugenio, closing thoughts. We've got about 2 minutes left.
I wait for all of you here in Belgrade next year if we will manage to organize this slow fish edition. And I also hope I will take my Italian tourists to visit all your beautiful activities.
Yes, yes. Sally? Sally, got any closing comments?
She's on mute.
Yes, no.
I'm on mute. Nice
No,
change.
she's on mute. There we go.
Yeah, we
You're
just,
mute.
I think we start at this level. There's no point in talking to politicians or government. There's no point. We have to start at this level and lead by example. Tammy, you're just my most favorite. Thank you. This is where we have to start. We have to start by respecting that we're only here for a short time. We only have the absolute privilege and honor of being on this planet for a very short time, and we have to revere it and respect it, and treat it with the love that it needs, and it will provide. But if we keep messing it up by being greedy, thoughtless, selfish human beings, then we'll destroy it for everybody. That's it. Thank you.
Tiberio, you've got about a minute left. Your closing thoughts. Unmute.
Thank you. Yes, I was working on the mirror or the image. It's important to indeed to be in connection with the people on the ground, because sometimes we are academics, researchers, and we should be there to understand, to study, understand. Eugenio said some words about what happened in the Danube Delta, and indeed, those ideas were the result of a research, anthropological and many anthropological research. So we need more and more to understand what the people are facing regarding the nature and the sustainability.
Great, great. Well, we're technically out of time, but just to let you know how this platform works, we could go on for the next 48 hours because the other sessions start. This is literally like being in a real conference, but I want to be respectful of your time. And also just what I'll be working on is when we get together in person, there will be a Slow Fish New Hampshire next March. Hopefully Eugenio will have a Slow Fish Belgrade in June or so. And then we're into the year of Teta Madre and Torino in the fall. And I hope to get a Rivers Coalition there. And then also Slow Fish Geneva, which will be in the spring, summer of 2023. And that's where I met Sally twice. And now that we have this virtual sphere, maybe if we can't all be in New Hampshire, some of us can be here via this technology. This is a beginning of conversations. This wasn't just a presentation. And I'm so thankful and honored that all of you lent your voices in your time today as we begin and move forward, because there's no other way. We can't go back. Kelly?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone who presented today. Thank you, everyone.